Breaking news this evening. An asylum seeker previously charged with sexual assault has escaped custody and is currently the subject of a nationwide manhunt after being mistakenly released from prison. The incident has sparked fierce political debate and raised serious questions about the prison system's operational failures. What we're witnessing tonight is not merely an administrative error, but what many are calling a catastrophic breakdown in the fundamental duty of government to protect its citizens. The individual, who faces charges of sexual assault, was discharged from custody in error and remains at large across the United Kingdom. This case has rapidly become emblematic of what critics describe as systemic failures within the justice system, prompting intense scrutiny of the current administration's handling of prison operations and immigration enforcement. The implications of this incident extend far beyond a single mistaken release. This represents, according to opposition figures and political analysts, a damning indictment of how the current government manages both the prison estate and immigration controls. To understand the full magnitude of what's transpired, we need to examine the timeline of events. The individual in question entered the United Kingdom through irregular channels, bypassing normal immigration controls. Within just 8 days of arrival, he committed what authorities describe as despicable crimes against a 14-year-old girl. He was subsequently charged, processed through the justice system, and placed in custody. Throughout this period, he was housed in government-provided accommodation at taxpayer expense. Then, in what can only be described as an extraordinary failure of protocol, he was released from prison by mistake. Not through any legal process, not through judicial review, but through simple administrative error. During a television interview addressing the crisis, Justice Secretary David Lammy defended the government's position whilst acknowledging the severity of the situation. His performance during this interview has itself become a focal point of controversy, with critics suggesting his responses demonstrated either a lack of understanding of the gravity of the situation or an unwillingness to accept full responsibility. When questioned directly about why the government had failed in its fundamental duty to keep citizens safe and the country secure, Lammy's response focused significantly on inherited problems from the previous administration. The Justice Secretary stated, "Let us be clear. We inherited a collapsing prison system in which the previous government was releasing people early, in which our police forces were overflowing. And indeed, we have a sentencing bill in Parliament seeking to address that issue, and we have stabilized the system. But that can be no excuse for wrongly releasing an individual, a dangerous individual, into the community. And that's why Essex Police, the Metropolitan Police, and the British Transport Police are conducting a manhunt tonight to find this individual and ensure that he is in custody or indeed returned to Ethiopia where he belongs." This response pattern of attributing current operational failures to previous administrations has become a recurring theme in Labour's governance, according to political observers. Critics argue that whilst inherited systemic challenges are legitimate concerns, operational failures occurring months into a new administration must ultimately rest with current ministers. The Justice Secretary himself acknowledged that inherited problems can be no excuse for this specific failure, yet his opening remarks focused predominantly on those inherited challenges rather than on immediate accountability measures. When pressed about his personal reaction to the incident, the Justice Secretary's tone shifted noticeably. "I'm livid," he stated emphatically. "I'm livid on behalf of the public that this individual who committed a sexual assault on a young minor and a woman is at large tonight." This expression of anger, whilst perhaps intended to demonstrate solidarity with public concern, has been interpreted by some commentators as insufficient given his position as the minister directly responsible for the prison system. Expressions of personal frustration, critics suggest, must be accompanied by concrete accountability measures and systemic reforms. Regarding immediate action being taken, Lammy confirmed, "As you would expect, I spoke to the Home Secretary today. I have launched an investigation into what has happened in the prison service to allow this to come about. But the important thing is that we protect the public. The important thing is that the police are able to do their work and find this individual. And the important thing is, if anyone is watching and knows where he is, that they call 999 and ensure, and indeed, that he gives himself up and returns to the custody that he should be in." The launch of an investigation is standard protocol following such incidents, but questions remain about whether this response is adequate given the severity of the failure. An investigation, by its nature, is a retrospective examination. What the public is demanding, according to polling and social media reaction, is assurance that immediate preventative measures have been implemented to ensure no similar releases occur whilst the investigation proceeds. The Justice Secretary's statement, whilst outlining the investigation, provided limited detail on such immediate safeguards. The situation presents a deeply troubling scenario for communities across the United Kingdom, but particularly in Essex, where the individual was last known to be located. A dangerous individual with a documented history of sexual offenses against minors is currently at large, having been housed in government accommodation following irregular entry into the country. The circumstances surrounding his mistaken release highlight what many view as fundamental incompetence within the current administration's management of the justice and immigration systems. This is not merely about bureaucratic inefficiency. This is about public safety, about the protection of vulnerable children, and about whether the most basic functions of government are being executed competently. Consider the sequence of failures that had to occur for this situation to materialize. First, immigration controls failed to prevent irregular entry. Second, despite committing serious offenses within days of arrival, the individual was not immediately prioritized for deportation proceedings. Third, prison administration systems failed so catastrophically that a dangerous offender was released in error. Each of these represents a separate systemic failure. Together, they paint a picture of an immigration and justice system operating with alarming dysfunction. The opposition has responded with considerable force to this development, seizing upon the incident as evidence of broader governmental incompetence. Conservative representatives have been particularly vocal in their criticism, arguing that the incident encapsulates not merely a single error, but a pattern of failures in government policy and execution across multiple departments. Opposition members delivered a scathing assessment. He came into the country illegally under a Labour government. He committed despicable crimes against a 14-year-old girl under this Labour government. And it's this Labour government that has just let him out by mistake. There is only one group of people to blame for this, and that is the Labour government. They've let out a dangerous sex offender who preyed on a 14-year-old girl just 8 days after entering the country illegally. And now they've let him out. This is staggering incompetence. Unbelievable ineptitude by David Lammy and Shabana Mahmood. And children, young girls in Essex, are going to be at risk tonight because of Labour's incompetence. This framing by the opposition is politically devastating because it connects three separate policy areas: immigration, criminal justice, and public safety, into a single narrative of failure. Each component reinforces the others. The irregular entry demonstrates immigration enforcement failures. The rapid commission of serious crimes demonstrates the risks of inadequate border security. And the mistaken release demonstrates operational incompetence within the justice system. Together, these create a compelling political narrative that the government is failing in its most fundamental responsibilities. The opposition continued their critique with specific policy proposals. What should be happening is that within a week of arrival, illegal immigrants should be getting deported back to their country of origin if possible, or a safe third country. Labour ministers are presiding over the whole system, the way that illegal immigrants are dealt with, the way they're housed, the way that prisoners are then handled. So it's a problem with the system, and clearly an investigation and inquiry is needed into exactly what happened here. But David Lammy, the Justice Secretary, and Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, should be apologizing for presiding over this fiasco. This critique extends beyond specific individuals to encompass systemic policy choices made by the current government. The opposition argues that Labour's approach to immigration enforcement, prisoner management, and accommodation of asylum seekers has created conditions where such failures become not merely possible, but perhaps inevitable. By housing individuals who entered irregularly in hotels and other accommodation at public expense, by not prioritizing rapid deportation procedures, and by operating prison systems under strain, the government has, according to critics, created the perfect conditions for this type of catastrophic failure. The opposition has also emphasized their alternative approach, which centers on withdrawal from international treaties they argue constrain effective immigration enforcement. We have set out a different approach where we get rid of the European Convention on Human Rights, which allows people to stay here in the first place. He should have been deported, in our view, under our new policy. He should have been deported straight away. The European Convention on Human Rights currently makes that difficult, which is why we need to get rid of it. And this situation would have been removed. This proposal to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights has become a central plank of conservative immigration policy. They argue that membership in the convention, whilst originally intended to protect fundamental rights, has been interpreted by courts in ways that prevent effective immigration enforcement and deportation of foreign criminals. Whether withdrawal from the ECHR would actually facilitate faster deportations remains legally contentious, with constitutional experts divided on the question. However, politically it provides the opposition, with a clear policy differentiation from the government and a proposed solution to incidents like this one. Further commentary from political figures across the spectrum has stressed the gravity of the situation and its implications for ministerial accountability. Senior conservative voices have been unequivocal. It is just beggars belief that this has happened. I cannot understand the level of incompetence that lies behind this. So task 1, get this man. Task 2, get him deported. And then 3, come to Parliament on Monday and explain how this has happened, who is going to be held to account. And if he can't, then look, David Lammy has to consider his own position. But the task before him at the moment is to find this dangerous man and get him out of our country as quickly as possible. This statement outlines a clear sequence of accountability, measures that the opposition believes should follow. Immediate action to apprehend the fugitive is obviously paramount. But beyond that, deportation should follow swiftly, and then a full parliamentary accounting must occur. The suggestion that the Justice Secretary should consider his own position is political language for a resignation call. The opposition is arguing that failures of this magnitude should carry consequences for the ministers responsible, not merely for lower-level prison staff who may have made the immediate error. The calls for resignation have been echoed by other political figures and commentators. David Lammy should do the decent thing and resign. He failed as Foreign Secretary. Now he's failed as Justice Secretary. When a convicted rapist asylum seeker can be released by mistake, the system and its leader have failed the British people. This is the most humiliating thing ever. This broader critique of David Lammy's ministerial record attempts to establish a pattern of failure across multiple high-profile positions. Whether such criticisms are fair assessments of his tenure or partisan political attacks depends largely on one's political perspective. However, the perception of competence in government is often as politically important as actual competence, and these attacks are designed to establish a narrative of ministerial inadequacy that will be difficult for Lammy to shake. Regardless of the investigation's eventual findings, senior political commentators have echoed these concerns about governmental competence and accountability. Former Home Secretary Suella Braverman has been among the most vocal critics, leveraging her own experience in immigration enforcement to question the current administration's approach. Braverman's interventions carry particular weight because of her recent tenure in the role and her detailed knowledge of Home Office operations. Her criticism suggests that from the perspective of someone intimately familiar with these systems, the current failures represent not inevitable consequences of systemic constraints, but rather avoidable outcomes of poor policy choices and inadequate oversight. The incident has generated widespread public discussion about accountability within the justice system and immigration enforcement mechanisms. Social media platforms have been dominated by discussion of the case, with hashtags related to the incident trending nationally. Public sentiment based on preliminary polling and social media analysis appears overwhelmingly critical of the government's handling of the situation. Even among labor supporters, there is considerable unease about how this incident occurred and what it reveals about governmental competence. The situation presents an extraordinary set of circumstances for international observers as well. Foreign media outlets have picked up the story, often framing it as emblematic of broader challenges facing European nations in managing immigration and maintaining public safety. For a nation that has historically prided itself on effective governance and robust institutions, the international coverage of this incident is particularly embarrassing. It reinforces narratives about institutional decline and governmental dysfunction that the current administration has been attempting to counter. The mistaken release of an individual charged with serious sexual offenses, who entered the country through irregular means and was subsequently housed at public expense, represents what critics describe as a cascade of systemic failures across multiple government departments. Each failure, individually, might be explained as the result of systemic pressures, resource constraints, or human error. But collectively, they suggest something more troubling: a government that has lost effective control of fundamental state functions. Consider the implications for public trust in institutions. If the prison service cannot be relied upon to maintain custody of dangerous offenders, If immigration systems cannot prevent or promptly address irregular entry, if ministerial oversight is insufficient to prevent such catastrophic errors, then what confidence can citizens have that government is fulfilling its most basic obligations? This erosion of trust in institutional competence is perhaps the most lasting damage from incidents like this one, far outlasting the immediate manhunt and eventual recapture. As of the latest updates this evening, the individual remains at large and has not yet been apprehended. Multiple police forces, including Essex Police, the Metropolitan Police, and British Transport Police, are coordinating a nationwide manhunt. Resources have been diverted from other policing priorities to focus on locating this fugitive. The cost of this manhunt, both in financial terms and in opportunity cost of other policing that cannot be conducted, represents an additional consequence of the original administrative failure. The Labour government faces accusations of deflecting responsibility and failing to accept accountability for operational failures within departments under their direct control. Despite attempts to attribute systemic issues to the previous administration during the televised interview, critics argue that current ministers must bear responsibility for present-day operational failures. This tension between inherited problems and current accountability is a familiar feature of political transitions, but it becomes particularly acute when failures involve public safety. The manhunt continues across multiple police jurisdictions, with officers conducting extensive searches and following up numerous leads from the public. Authorities have urged anyone with information about the fugitive's whereabouts to contact emergency services immediately. There is considerable concern that the individual may pose an ongoing threat to public safety, particularly to vulnerable young people. Given the nature of his previous alleged offenses, public safety remains the paramount concern as authorities work to resolve this serious breach of custody protocols. However, the political ramifications continue to intensify. The government faces questions not merely about this specific incident, but about broader patterns of competence and accountability. Opposition parties are demanding emergency parliamentary debates. Backbench MPs from all parties are expressing concern about what this reveals about the state of the prison and immigration systems. This developing story raises fundamental questions about prison management, immigration enforcement, and ministerial accountability that extend far beyond the immediate manhunt. How did prison administrative systems fail so completely that a dangerous offender was released? Were there warning signs that were missed? Have budget cuts or staff shortages contributed to administrative failures? Why was this individual not prioritized for deportation proceedings given the seriousness of the alleged offenses? What immediate measures have been implemented to prevent similar releases whilst the investigation proceeds? The coming days will likely see intensified political pressure on the Justice Secretary and Home Secretary to provide comprehensive explanations for how such a significant operational failure could occur, and what measures will be implemented to prevent similar incidents in future. Parliament will demand answers. Select committees will likely launch inquiries. The media will continue investigating the circumstances surrounding both the original crimes and the mistaken release. For David Lammy and Shabana Mahmood, this represents a critical test of their ministerial capabilities and their political futures. How they respond to this crisis, the transparency they demonstrate, the accountability they accept, and the reforms they implement will significantly impact their standing within government and with the public. Ministerial careers have been ended by less significant failures than this one. The incident continues to develop, and further updates will be provided as the situation unfolds and as more information becomes available from investigating authorities and government officials. The manhunt remains active. The political controversy continues to intensify, and fundamental questions about governmental competence remain unanswered. This is a story that will dominate political discourse for days, if not weeks to come, and its ramifications for the current government may prove long-lasting and deeply damaging to their credibility on core issues of public safety and institutional competence.